My Korean Mafia husband chose his mistress at my mother's funeral. He didn't know his empire was in my name. My husband chose his mistress over me at my mother's funeral. He did it in front of 300 people, the most powerful and most dangerous people in the country. He stood beside her in her blood-red dress while I stood beside my mother's coffin, and he looked me in the eyes and told me I was nothing, that I had always been nothing. A waitress he'd married out of pity, a foreign girl his family had tolerated only because the old woman in that photograph had insisted. He was so sure of himself, so calm. With my mother gone, he believed the empire was finally his. The buildings, the money, the men with guns standing along every wall of that room. He had no idea that every single thing he thought he owned already belonged to me. My name is Amara, and this is the story of the morning I stood still and let my husband bury himself. If you're new to Mafia Heartbeat, hit that subscribe button and stay with me all the way to the end. Because what happened in the final 10 minutes of that funeral is something none of those 300 people will ever be able to forget. Let me take you back to the beginning. I came to this country at 19 with one suitcase and a work visa that was already half a lie. No family, no money. What I had was a job pouring tea at a quiet little tea house in the back streets of the city, the kind of place where the regulars never looked up when you walked in. People didn't see me there. A black girl in an apron in a city that had decided long before I arrived exactly where someone like me belonged. Some of them spoke about me right in front of my face, certain I couldn't understand. I understood more than they thought. I always have. There was one customer who came every Thursday and sat alone at the corner table by the window. An older woman, small and straight-backed, always in dark silk, always with two men who waited by the door and never sat down. The whole staff was terrified of her. Nobody said her name out loud, but everybody knew what she was. The kind of family that could close your doors with a single phone call. I didn't know any of that. I just knew she ordered the same barley tea, that her hands shook a little around the cup, and that she sat alone with a sadness on her face I recognized. Because I carried the same one, so I was kind to her, that's all. I learned she liked her tea hotter than we served it, and I refilled her cup before she asked. One rainy Thursday, she came in soaked through, and I brought her a dry towel without anyone telling me to. And she looked at me for a long moment like I'd done something strange and impossible. "Why are you being good to me?" she asked. Her English was careful and old-fashioned. "Because you look like you could use someone being good to you," I said. I found out later that her only daughter had died 9 years before, and that she'd built something enormous and terrible out of grief, and never let any of it touch her heart again. The men by the door weren't bodyguards. They were soldiers, and the family she'd built was not the kind you walked away from. Her name was Sun. 3 months after that rainy Thursday, she sat across from me in a private room and told me she wanted to take me in. Not as staff, as her daughter. People in that city crossed the street when her name was spoken, and she chose me, a tired girl in an apron who'd brought her a towel. She raised me. She paid for my education, then taught me everything the schools couldn't, how the family worked, how to read a room full of dangerous men and know exactly who would break first, how to keep my face still, no matter what was burning underneath it. Power, she told me once, is mostly just refusing to flinch when everyone expects you to. I called her Ioma, mother, and for the first time in my life I had one. But the family never accepted me. To them I was the waitress, the foreigner the old woman had dragged in off the street. They smiled to my face because they feared her. I heard the whispers for years. Charity case. She'll never be one of us. The day Madam Cha dies, that girl is finished. And then there was Ryu Kangdae. He was one of the family's rising men when I met him. Sharp, ambitious, beautiful in that cold way that should have warned me. Tattoos climbing up his neck, a watch worth more than the tea house I came from, and a smile he turned, on and off like a light. Ioma was getting older. She wanted me protected, wanted me tied to the family in a way no one could question. She blessed the marriage. I think she had doubts even then. The night before my wedding, she held my face in her hands and said, "If he ever shows you who he really is, believe him the first time. Don't waste years hoping he'll become someone he was never going to be." I was too in love to really hear her. For a while it was good, then it wasn't. The cold crept back into him, slowly then, all at once, the late nights. The phone turned face down. And then Dahai, younger than me, sharp-edged and glittering, the kind of woman who looks at a powerful man and sees a door she intends to walk through. Of course I knew. I'd been raised by a woman who taught me to read people for a living. But I stayed. I told myself it was for Ioma, who was sick now. I told myself I was being patient, dignified. The truth is I was still hoping. My mother died on a Tuesday at the end of spring. I was holding her hand. In her last hours, when the room was empty and it was only the two of us, she pulled me close with what strength she had left. Her voice was barely a thread. "Listen to me, my daughter. Everything is in your name, not his, yours, the houses, the accounts, the companies, the controlling share of all of it. I signed it over years ago, mister. Go has the papers, sealed, witnessed, ironclad. Kangde owns nothing, he never did. He's only ever been managing what is yours." I started to speak and she pressed my hand harder. "Don't use it in anger. Grief makes us blind and you have a soft heart even though you pretend you don't. Let them show you who they are first. When you are certain, only then do you act. And Amara, her eyes found mine one last time. Do it in the light. I spent my whole life in the dark so that you wouldn't have to. Take this family out of the blood. Promise me." I promised her. She was gone before the sun came up. I didn't tell a soul what she'd said, not one person. I folded it deep inside me and I went to bury my mother. We held the funeral at the family estate, the old house, with the wooden beams and the courtyard, the way she would have wanted. White chrysanthemums everywhere. Her portrait at the centre of the altar, candles on either side. Her face looking out over the room exactly the way she used to look out over a table of frightened men. Calm, knowing, unafraid. 300 people came. The entire family, the entire organization. Every captain, every elder, every soldier, all of them in black. All of them there to pay respect to the woman who had ruled them for 30 years. I stood beside her coffin in a black dress and received them one by one. And even there, even at my own mother's funeral, I could feel it. The coldness. The condolences that didn't reach the eyes. The elders who bowed a half-inch less than they should have. I was the daughter, and I was alone in a room of 300 people. Kangde was nowhere. He hadn't helped with a single arrangement. He hadn't sat with me through a single night of the wake. I'd done all of it alone. And then, 2 hours in, the doors at the back of the courtyard opened and he walked in. He didn't come alone. Dahai was on his arm and she was wearing red. Deep, glistening burgundy at a funeral where the only colours permitted are black and white and the grief of the family. A gasp moved through the room like wind through grass. She knew exactly what she was doing, so did he. He didn't come to me. That was the first cut. He walked his mistress straight past my mother's coffin, past me, and stood near the altar with his hand resting on the small of her back, surveying the room like a man taking inventory of what he'd just inherited. Elder Huang, the family's oldest advisor, a man my mother had kept close for 30 years, crossed the floor and bowed deeply to Kangde. "The head of the family," he said, loud enough to carry. He did not so much as glance at me. And just like that, 300 people understood the story they were being told. The old queen was dead. Here was the new king. Dahai let her eyes drift over the altar, over the white flowers, over my mother's photograph, with the faint, bored expression of someone in a museum. Then she walked toward me. She stopped, close enough that only a few could hear, and she smiled. "You can go back to waiting tables now," she said softly. "The family doesn't need a servant playing wife. It never really did." I said nothing. I kept my face still. Power is refusing to flinch when everyone expects you to. Kangde's voice rose then, for the whole room. He wasn't whispering. He wanted witnesses. "Since everyone is here," he said, "there's no point pretending. My mother-in-law is gone, may she rest. And with her gone, there's no longer any reason to keep up a marriage that was never anything more than her sentimental project. He looked at me across the floor, across my mother's coffin. Amara and I are finished. Dahai stands beside me now. This is the family's future. The silence broke into murmurs. A few people looked genuinely shocked. Most simply rearranged themselves, the way people do, turning their shoulders a few degrees toward the new center of gravity. I found my voice. It came out steady. "You're doing this here, at my mother's funeral in front of her body." He smiled. "Don't perform for them, Amara. We both know the tears are for the inheritance, not for the old woman." That one landed somewhere deep. Not because it was true, but because he could say it, out loud, about the woman I'd watched die 3 days ago, and 300 people would let him. Elder Huang stepped in then, smooth as oil. "Amara," he said in the patient tone you use with a child who's overstayed, "be reasonable. The estate, the businesses, the men, all of it answers to Kangde now. There's nothing here for you. Leave with what dignity you have left. It's the kindest thing for everyone." Dahai's eyes dropped to my hand, to the ring on my finger, a band of old green jade my mother had worn for 40 years and slipped onto my hand the week before she died. "That ring belongs to the family," Dahai said. "Take it off." My whole hand closed over it. They were asking me to surrender the last thing my mother ever gave me over her open coffin in front of everyone who'd ever decided I didn't belong. "It was my mother's," I said quietly. "She wasn't your mother," Kangde said, and he said it carelessly, like swatting a fly. "She was a lonely old woman who got attached to her help, and that's all you ever were. The help she dressed up as a daughter." He leaned in close so the front rows could hear it. Even she knew it in the end. Blood is blood. You think a woman like her would ever put her empire in the hands of a charity case she found pouring tea? She pitied you, Amara. She never once trusted you with anything that mattered. A guard near the door took a step toward me, reading his boss, ready to walk me out. That's when a young man near the back said, "Stop!" His name was Jamin, barely 23. My mother had paid for his little sister's heart surgery 2 years before, no strings, just because she'd heard about it. He stepped forward now, pale, his hands shaking. "This isn't right. Madam Cha is lying right there. You can't. At her funeral, you can't." Elder Huang turned and looked at him, just looked at him. And 2 of the older men near Jamin shifted closer, and someone muttered his name like a warning, and I watched the courage drain out of that boy in real time. The cost was too high. He lowered his eyes. He stepped back into the crowd. I never blamed him. For about 10 seconds, he was the only honest person in that room. What I noticed, what nobody else seemed to notice, was that along the walls the older soldiers hadn't moved at all. Captain Bay, the man who'd run my mother's personal guard for 20 years, stood with his hands folded, his face unreadable, watching everything. He hadn't bowed to Kangde. He hadn't turned his shoulders. He was simply waiting, still as a locked door. I didn't understand yet why that stillness mattered. I would. The guard reached me. He didn't grab me. Even he seemed reluctant. "Ma'am," he said low, "this way." And so I walked, toward the doors. Away from my mother's coffin, away from the altar, away from her photograph, watching over a room full of people who had decided I was nothing. The tears came finally, hot down my face, and I hated them, and I couldn't stop them. Behind me I heard Dahai laugh. A small, bright, satisfied sound. I reached the threshold. The doors stood open onto the courtyard. The spring light, the road, the rest of my life. I could keep walking. I could disappear. Take everything my mother had left me quietly, through lawyers, from 1,000 miles away. And never see one of these faces again. It would have been so much easier, so much safer. Walk out into the light and never look back. And then I heard my mother's voice in my head, clear as if she were standing beside me. "Let them show you who they are first, when you are certain. Only then do you act." I was certain now. I had seen exactly who every person in that room was. I stopped walking. I turned around. I don't know what was on my face, but the laughing stopped. Dahai's smile faltered. 300 people felt the temperature in that courtyard drop without understanding why. I walked back in, slowly. The guard didn't try to stop me. I crossed the floor, and I stood at the foot of my mother's coffin, where I belonged. and I looked at my husband. "You said the empire is yours," I said. My voice was very quiet and very clear, and the room went silent to hear it. "I'm going to correct you now, in front of everyone, so there is no confusion later about what happened here today." Kangde rolled his eyes. "Amara, Mr. Go." From the side of the room, an old man stepped forward. He'd been there the whole time, dressed in formal black-white funeral gloves on his hands. My mother's lawyer for 30 years, the keeper of every secret she ever had. In his gloved hands he held a leather foley, and as he opened it, the gold of an official seal caught the candlelight. He'd been waiting all morning. He'd been waiting for me to give the word. "As Madame Cha's counsel, Mr. Go said, his old voice ringing through the courtyard, "I am bound to read the truth into the record before these witnesses." He held the documents up so the room could see the seals. 11 years ago, Cha Mei-sun transferred full and exclusive ownership of everything this family holds. Every building, every bank account, the controlling share of every company, every deed of property, and every contract that carries this family's name, to her daughter and sole heir, Amara. Her name, and her name alone, sits on all of it. The transfer is sealed, witnessed, and irrevocable. It has been law for 11 years. He turned the page toward Kangde. Ryu Kangde has never owned any part of this family. Not one building, not one. He was permitted by Madame Cha's grace to manage what has always belonged to her daughter. Kangde laughed. "It came out wrong too loud. That's insane. The seal is forged. She's bluffing. She's a waitress. She doesn't." "The registry confirms it," Mr. Go said calmly. "The dates, the signatures, the witnesses. You may have your own lawyers verify it within the hour. They will find exactly what I have told you." I watched it happen on his face. The exact moment the floor disappeared beneath him. All that cold certainty, all that tattooed swagger, draining out until underneath was just a man who didn't know where he was standing. I looked at him then, and I gave him back his own words. "You said she never trusted me with anything that mattered." The courtyard was so quiet. I could hear the candles burning. "She put her entire life in my name. Every building you walked into like you owned it. Every account you ever spent from. The floor you are standing on right now. None of it was ever yours, Kangde. It never would have been. The waitress owns all of it." And then Captain Bay moved. The old soldier crossed the courtyard, and in front of 300 people he stopped before me and he bowed. Deep, formal. "The bow you give to the head of the family." "Madam," he said, and behind him, all along the walls, the men moved. Not Kangde's loud young soldiers, the old guard, the ones who actually held the weight in that organization, the ones who had been my mother's for 20 and 30 years. One after another they turned, and they faced me, and they bowed. The men Kangde believed were his had never been his at all. They had always belonged to the bloodline, and the bloodline by my mother's hand was me. Kangde looked around the room and understood, finally, the thing my mother taught me on a rainy Thursday years ago. He had no men, he had no money, he had no buildings and no name. He was standing in my house, on my ground, surrounded by my soldiers, over the body of the woman who had made him and whom he'd just spat on. Dahai let go of his arm. She actually stepped away from him, physically, the second the power left him. The way you step away from something that started to smell. Whatever she'd felt for him had only ever been for what he could give her, and now he had nothing. So neither did she. Then she turned to me. The woman who'd worn red to my mother's funeral, who'd told me to crawl back to waiting tables. She lowered her head and began to bend into a bow. "Amara, please. I didn't know. I swear I didn't. Don't." One word and she froze halfway down. "Don't bow to me now. You already chose your side." I looked at the broken man beside her. "Stand up straight and go stand next to it." Elder Huang, the man who'd told me to leave with what dignity I left, was suddenly bowing, stammering. "Madam, There was a misunderstanding. I only meant..." The power he'd served for 30 years had never been Kangde's. He'd just bet on the wrong king, in front of the queen, over her own coffin. The 300 faces that had turned away from me an hour ago were all turned toward me now. Captain Bay stepped close, his voice low so only I could hear it. "Say the word, madam." He humiliated you in your mother's house. No one would ever know." He didn't have to explain what he meant. This was the family my mother had built. There were rooms men walked into and never walked out of. On my word, Ryu Kangdae would simply cease to exist. Everyone was watching me. Even Kangdae had gone still, waiting, finally afraid. And I stood there at my mother's coffin, and I felt the whole weight of who I could become settle onto my shoulders. It would have been so easy. He had earned it. Some part of me wanted it, but I heard her again. "I spent my whole life in the dark so that you wouldn't have to. Take this family out of the blood. Promise me." I had promised her. "No," I said. I looked at Kangdae. "My mother spent her entire life in the dark so that I could choose the light. I'm not going to bury you the way this family has buried its enemies. That would make me yours, and I was never yours. I let that sit. I'm going to do something worse. I'm going to let you live, with exactly what you walked in here with this morning. Nothing." I turned to Mr. Go. "Every account he's touched, frozen by tonight. Every property, every car, every card. He leaves this estate with the clothes on his back." I looked back at my husband. "You wanted to be a powerful man so badly. Now go and find out who you are without my mother's money holding you up." Then I looked at Dahai in her ridiculous red dress. "Take her with you. You came in here together to take everything I have. Leave together with everything you've earned." I smiled, and it wasn't a kind smile. "You deserve each other. Give it a month." Captain Bay's men escorted Ryu Kangdae out of the estate. They walked him past the altar on his way to the door. Past the white flowers, past the candles, past the photograph of Cha-Mei's son, who watched the son-in-law she'd warned me about leave her house with the same calm, knowing expression she wore in life. He didn't look at her. He couldn't. He'd come to that funeral to cast me out of my mother's house. He left it himself with nothing. He'd brought his mistress to humiliate his wife. He left with her, pulling away from him at the door. He'd chosen my mother's funeral as the stage to take everything from me. It became the stage where he lost everything instead. When the doors closed behind them, the courtyard was silent. I turned from all of them and knelt in front of my mother's coffin, and I let myself grieve. Finally, the way I hadn't been able to all morning. And 300 of the most dangerous people in the country stood in silence and watched the true head of their family mourn the woman who'd raised her. That was 8 months ago. I run the family now, and I've begun doing the thing my mother whispered to me with her last breath, turning this enormous, dangerous machine slowly and carefully toward the light. Real businesses, clean money. We're getting out of the blood. It can't happen overnight, but every month we're further from the dark than the month before. I think she'd be proud of that. I reopened the tea house, the little one where a frightened girl once carried trays. It's mine now, and I go there on Thursdays and sit at the corner table by the window where she used to sit. Captain Bay stands at my right hand. There is no one in this world more loyal to me, and there is no one I trust more. Jae-min, the boy who said stop when no one else had the courage to. I promoted him. He sits in rooms now that men twice his age spent their whole lives trying to enter. When people ask me why, I tell them the truth. In my worst moment, surrounded by people who decided I was nothing, he was the only one who tried. That's the only thing I'll ever need to know about a person. Mr. Go still keeps my secrets, gloves and all. Ryu Kangdae is somewhere in this city, broke and powerless, a man no one fears anymore. The boss who walked into a room and watched everyone rearrange themselves around him now walks into rooms and watches everyone forget he's there. Dahai left him in 6 weeks. I was generous. I'd said a month. Last Thursday, I went to my mother's memorial. I sat with her for a long time, and before I left, I told her the only thing I really wanted her to hear. I did it in the light, Ioma, just like you asked. So let me leave you with this. Have you ever been underestimated by people who had no idea who they were dealing with? Have you ever stood in a room full of people who'd already decided what you were worth, while you quietly held something that would change everything? Here's what that morning taught me. The people who love you for what you can give them will leave the second you have nothing. But real love The rare kind. Builds you up in secret, hands you the keys when you least expect it, and asks for only one thing in return. That you choose the light, even when the dark would be easier. When someone shows you who they really are, believe them the first time. My mother told me that. I almost didn't listen. Don't make my mistake. If this story moved you, share it with someone who needs to hear it today. And if you're not yet part of the Mafia Heartbeat family, hit that subscribe button right now. Because as I have more stories like this one coming, and you are not going to want to miss what happens next.